Christina is a dear friend of mine, and she's the co-host of Living Wellness Live, and she just brings so much richness to this topic of spiritual abuse, but more than that, the overcoming. There's two sides to it, and she offers a breadth of knowledge and heart and experience and also research on the topic. And so I encourage you to watch this and share it with someone who you know has been through some kind of spiritually abusive situation or has been in an environment where we can learn from the knowledge of another person. First thing, you have your own experience with spiritual abuse. Tell me a little bit about what that looked like for you. How did you get started in that?
When I went to college, I was in a not so good place emotionally. Mental health has been a topic for myself ever since I was a little girl. And so I had just come from a 3-month-long therapy when I went to my new town, where I decided to become a teacher at a college. And quickly, just being by myself a lot, I fell into old patterns and became very depressed again. But having been raised Christian in the Baptist church, I was very used to going to church, and I needed to add that back into my routine. So I ended up meeting leaders of a movement within a church setting, and they were so kind to me. They saw my need, they saw my potential. They made me feel like they really were interested in helping me get closer to God, get better, become a mature person that has everything together, because that's how they looked like. They had it all together, and I wanted that. So I was in great need of purpose, of hearing God for myself personally. And I would have to say the first few months, wonderful things happened, and I developed a new sense of joy for life, especially with my mental health issues, where I would have many suicidal thoughts or just horrible condemning thoughts about myself and about my future, just ruminating in my brain, going round and round and round, and really sucking the life out of me. And they would teach me to denounce those lies and put Bible verses in there instead. So something like, goodness and mercy will follow me all the rest of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So a really great skill to learn. Yeah. That was life transformative for me.
So it sounds like you had lots of reason to trust them. They were treating you well. You were making positive changes in your life. How do you get from that to what you would consider spiritual abuse? Where was the gap?
They didn't like that I wanted to still have contact with my family. And I observed something very similar with all the other members who were all in similar stages in their life, that they were alienated from their families. It became more and more mandatory to show up. Until I realized if I don't show up, I get into trouble. I would go visit my parents, maybe for a weekend, and I would get phone calls, text messages, and I would even be asked to come back. It was more and more, let's all kind of become a community, or more like a commune. And so members of this group, as it developed, kind of all started to live together. And the idea, the dream was to kind of have our own property, as if that hadn't ever been done before and ended really badly. But no, we thought this is where the great thing of God is happening. I experienced the Holy Spirit in ways that I, as a Baptist, had never before. So I could not put together that you can experience something good and very bad from the same person. Yeah. It was very confusing. It really comes down to that trust. Because I saw the good results, I trusted them, and I trusted them with too much. I trusted them with everything. And that's also what they wanted. They became very opinionated, and not only opinionated, but claiming that their opinions were the opinions of God.
Can you share an example of that?
There was supposed to be this women's conference, and it was going to be quite expensive. I didn't really think that was fair to charge that kind of an amount of a student. And then there was a meeting, and the leader learned that I hadn't signed up for the conference yet. And I got this admonishment about where's my faith, and God will provide. I left that meeting knowing I have to sign up for that conference, or I don't ever have to show up again. Actually, later someone who was also in the meeting came to me and said that he was concerned when he saw that, when he witnessed all that talking down to someone and making it in a spiritual sense kind of a pressure.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of he was bringing up a red flag?
Yes.
Is that what you would feel like?
Yes, and I disregarded it because as soon as the conference started, all these awesome things happened. I met my future mother-in-law very quickly. I got prayers, I got just lessons that I learned during those few days that were so vital to me that I just thought if I hadn't trusted him, if I hadn't been obedient to his pressure, which apparently I needed to be obedient.
So you thought.
So I thought.
They were instilling in you.
It was working, sure. Yes. It's funny to think that he put all that pressure on me and then all these good things happened. But I took all the blessings and ran with them, and there was just a mile marker for my trust was cemented. I came to the conclusion that I cannot trust my own judgment, that I will make decisions that are bad for me because I'm concerned about money, I'm concerned about what would people think, or fear of failure, all these things, but I'm not really where God is. I can't grasp what God is thinking. So I fully entrusted myself to their care.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you had this time, maybe over time, where it switched from awesome to uncertain, but then it kind of cemented that this was really where you belonged. Yes. At what point, because you're not with this group anymore, so at what point do you feel like things started changing and you began to question again, is this where I really should be? Is this the right, at what point do you feel like something changed?
I should have picked up so much sooner that fear was always in the game. I was always afraid of how will they react. I mean, we did have just friendly conversations, and then those I wasn't generally afraid, but every once in a while there were so harsh things being said to me out of the blue when I would make a joke or a light comment, or just a naive comment, or just a dumb comment, but yet so much harshness that I learned to really be afraid of them. And I ended up, this is all in Germany, I ended up meeting my future mother-in-law, which I did not know, obviously, at that time, and went to Elk River to do an internship in the summer. That whole process was so difficult. The leader did not want me to go, but he wouldn't say it outright. So I just went and booked the trip, and a day before I left, he gave me hell for leaving, for desiring to not be part of this thing throughout the summer. But I had made this decision. I was going to do that internship in America. And so I went with it, but I went with such a deflated joy. And so I came here, but that joy very quickly came back because what I experienced here in that summer of 2007 was so over the top amazing, and freedom, just the freedom and the joy I experienced all across the board was something I hadn't known before. And I also met my future husband there, and we were together. So when I came back, I needed to face the fact that this had happened, that we're now together, and I'm hoping to be able to go back frequently. So that night, my parents picked me up from the airport, and I was going to go to sleep. My leader called and said that he knows that I want to go back to America, but he had this dream, and here's the interpretation. And the interpretation is I can never go back to America, and they just spiritually spoil me there. And they also, he mentioned that at the same telephone call, had to kick out one of my very best friends from college, actually, whom I had brought into the group in those weeks that I was gone. And I knew what that meant. When someone gets kicked out, you don't have contact with them anymore. So in that telephone call, I lost my best friend from school. And I was told I can never go back to America because there I will be spiritually spoiled. After all the amazing things I had been through there.
And do you feel like he was punishing you as a result of you going, or what was the point of that?
That would have been a good opportunity to come to some kind of a conclusion like that I'm dealing with a narcissist who wants to own me. I did not come to that conclusion. I came to the conclusion after having a severe nervous breakdown that night and spending the next day on my parents' couch until I had to go back because that was the town where I went to college, and college was about to start, so I had to go back. And nothing was worse than this feeling of I lost my purpose again, because I had just experienced so much purpose and my new home and feeling home with God and knowing what to do with my life. And it was all like, when he said all those things, I had only the option of leaving the group or saying, no, your discernment or what you're saying, God is saying to me is true, and there isn't like half. It's all true, and I have to accept that.
And do you feel like the reason why he didn't want you to go to America in the first place was because he knew you might experience that freedom and the joy outside of the group, which is what he was trying to protect, was keep you in there. That's where your joy comes from. And now that you're out, you've got wings, you're experiencing that outside of the group. Is that part of the reason why he didn't want you to go?
That is the eternal question that I cannot answer. Did he know what he was doing with all of us? Because I'm just one of essentially maybe 10 or a handful of young adults that were severely traumatized by this man and his cohort. But I cannot tell you if he knew what he was doing or if he truly believes to this day that he's doing the work of the Lord. Yeah. Whatever it was, he was very convinced, and I knew I needed to either leave and never look back, disregard that I will miss it, which was the great conclusion that I had come to. I cannot trust myself, and God wants me to trust him. It's a power play. We've seen this now from Hollywood with the Me Too movement, that a lot of people in power, men or women, have been using that power to just control the people that they can control, just because they can, and they're gaining something out of it. And on the other hand is the victim. The victim kind of plays along or doesn't know, kind of can't really see through the whole dynamic, because their own motive, their own agenda of being successful, of gaining something from that interaction with the person is at risk here. So both parties have an agenda, but the one is in power and the other one is in need. And from that perspective, it becomes abusive when the person in power decides to look for their own gain in the situation and doesn't want to uplift the person that comes to them in need and entrust themselves to them.
And was it at that point that you left the group, when you went back? And
no, I stayed, and I eventually broke up with James and gave myself even further into their care, because when I found myself in this struggle again, and it is not just a little bit of a, oh, this is uncomfortable, it's the torment of hell. When you think you're missing it, that God is saying to you, this is it, my child, but you're like, but I'm in love, and I had all this joy and this freedom, and I thought this was you over here in America, but apparently it wasn't. I had to make a decision. What do I believe? And for my own sanity. And so I went all in with, I must have totally missed it. I don't know what happened to myself. I need to really be careful with following my passions and really submit myself completely to what they're saying.
And what were your own motives for diving in? What were you looking for to get out of that experience of, I'm in, I'm committed? What were you looking for?
I was so needy by the time that I met them that I was looking for everything. I was looking for a husband, which I thought God had told me that the one of the leaders was going to be my husband, which, praise God, he miraculously freed me from that. That's actually a really funny story, because secretly I thought, here's my future husband, and this one of the guys was single, and I learned that he wasn't interested in me, but because there was someone else somewhere in a different country even. We're a very international group. And so I was heartbroken, and I was so embarrassed that I had joined this group and had gotten all these great experiences with God. Like, that God was so merciful that I went in there so needy, looking for all these fleshly things, but he was still meeting me, and raising me up. And so I took my Bible and I asked God, will you just speak to me about what the heck is going on? And I turned it around, closed my eyes, opened it up at a random place, put my finger on it, and it was upside down, so I turned it around, and I pointed my finger at a verse that had the last name of this man in it. And I've done the research. That name, that word, appears 3 times in the Luther translation of 1984 that I'm using in that situation. So the chances of pointing my finger blindly on his last name, very, very dim. What spoke to me in that verse was that God was saying to me that you're going to all these different sources to find joy, to find life, but I'm selling myself, and it's never going to satisfy me. And I only took this in regard to looking for a husband. I should have taken it as a complete overall, because I still turned to them for everything else. Now I weren't looking to get a husband here anymore, but I was still looking to get my life, my act together. Yeah. So I completely sold myself to these people. And the motive at the end of the day was my sanity. I just did not want to lose my sanity.
And what were some of the other red flags, or some of the turning points where you started to, at some point, shift and say, this isn't right? What would an example that you would point to be of an instance you had that gut feeling?
Yeah. There was so much shaming going on within our group, and demonizing of people that would leave or would be kicked out. I started to find myself thinking that I cannot, with a good conscience, recruit people into the group, which is a big expectation, and have them enter this insanity. I thought at that point, okay, this is what God had for me. I'm apparently able to handle the fire, being so close to God, face to face, the freshness of the Spirit, everything, the fire is burning in our midst. I must be able to handle it. But I cannot bring other people into it. That, I think, was a big red flag that I recognized, but I couldn't, at that point, kind of rectify it with the theology, because if you leave, you probably go to hell.
According to them.
According to them,
sure.
Of course.
And what about the theology? What made it okay? How did the group leaders justify their actions and their behavior?
Their theology was ever transforming. It was difficult to pinpoint them to anything. One thing that has stuck through the years that I've been with them is they promise you to teach you to hear the Holy Spirit for yourself, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like with Moses and in the Old Testament and the people of Israel, that Moses is the one who knows what God is saying, and everybody else just has to obey and swallow it and be very, very obedient. The God picture we received was that God is ever watching, and our salvation in Jesus Christ is, yes, given by grace, but to maintain it, you must be obedient to what Jesus says and to what God says. There are certain Bible verses you will be able to use to justify that. And then on top of that, there's so much stuff about leadership in Paul's letters, such as mimic your spiritual leaders or entrust your souls to them because they're watching over your souls, be obedient to them, all those kinds of things. So it was at the end of the day all about obeying them as if they were God. And if you make any mistake in that sense, it could be a slight mistake. It could be, I had a critical thought today. It would cause spiritual guilt.
And it sounds like another part of the concern where you would kind of be able to identify, is this a safe place or is this a spiritually abusive place, is that one thing you mentioned was that the mark was moving. The theology was ever changing, and it wasn't that God is the same yesterday as today as tomorrow, that if the mark keeps moving, how do you ever live up to that? How do you ever be able to make progress?
Right, yes. How can you ever excel and be like, now we can talk because now I understand what you're saying, now I can think about what you're saying. And by the time I felt like I understood what we're talking about, we had already moved on to something completely different. And that happened so many times. I was unfortunately naive enough to even consider them masterful to help me with college work. So I would ask them, about theses I would write and whatnot. Very sadly remember a oral exam that I had where I read the books that I was recommended by my leader, and I flunked that so badly because those books didn't have anything to do with what the oral exam was about. Yeah. It was really sad.
And how did they respond to that? Did they say that was your fault? Did they turn it around on you, or did you not tell them? I mean, how would they respond to you taking their advice and then it didn't work, it failed miserably?
Yeah, this is just one example of many where their advice wasn't working well for me. And I recognized quickly, if something good happens in my life, they will take the glory, they'll take the honor. But if something bad happens, it's on me. I wasn't spiritual enough. I wasn't obedient enough. Or I was fleshly or soulish. I was not in the spirit. Or I have hidden sin. Hidden motives, all these things that put the focus on me, where I get even more paranoid.
Yeah, sounds very different than the books that we're reading about spiritual abuse. Speak a little bit to your experience and what you've been reading and learning from our friends Brian Zond and David Johnson and Jeff Van Vonderen. How does that speak into your story?
Yes. My goodness. So the first book I read was actually in Germany, when I had already moved to America and left the group. I was visiting my mother in Germany, and she gave this book in German to me and said, I think maybe now you're ready to read it. And so I just started and I was like, this is it. This is exactly what happened to me. So I read the entire book very quickly, and I read it multiple times. I discussed it for years and years with my home group, my home church. And this has helped me tremendously understand the dynamics, understand my part in it. It's difficult to say to a victim, what was your part in it? And there are definitely cases where the victim had nothing to do with it, but I know what happened to me. I had a part in it, and I needed to understand and own that part. And I think otherwise I would have gone from one cult to another, which, coming to America, I was ready to do just that. Yeah. Thankfully, God gave me a wiser husband than myself who kept me from that. And then there's Brian Zahn's book, Sinners in the Hand of a Loving God. I just recently came across this book, but I wish I had read it 8 years ago, because it would have just been pure spiritual medicine.
So you're not in that group anymore, and you call it a cult. That sounds like such a foreign word, but I mean, what is a cult?
Yeah, my group has all the markers of a cult. There's idolizing of a character. Like there's this one idol who is being beholden, and in our group it was the main leader, and then right close under him, the co-leader. There's a lot of financial expectations, a lot of money being invested all the time with the promise of, you're sowing the seed and you're going to get the results. You just have to trust. There is this cultish, slavish obedience that for other people is very concerning. but bringing that concern to that person that is slavishly obedient won't do anything. And I don't have any delusions about that. Someone would watch an interview like this, or even read maybe The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse by David Johnson and Jeff Van Wanderen, and then be like, oh, this is me. Because when you're slavishly obedient, you don't have critical thoughts. They may come in, but you bind them and you reject the Satan to get behind you, and you're not there yet. But there comes a time when you will be ready, and then it can really accumulate. And I would say that same thing had happened with me too. There was a lot of concern being poured out in my direction from everybody I knew, a lot of family, obviously, and friends, and then my own concern. And it accumulated to a place where I said to James, I don't think I want to be part of this group anymore.
So how did you get out? How did you leave the group? How were you able to do that?
So James needed to come to Germany, apologize, and surrender to the leaders in order for us to get married. And so he did that. I don't think he saw through the plan at all, but what ended up happening is that he did just that, and he himself got severely hurt in the process. But when we got married, very quickly I had a dream about him taking my hand and leading me into the desert, and there was kind of like a hotel room, and I turned around and the door was gone. There was only a brick wall. So this dream was speaking about leaving and never coming back. And remember, I was scared to death of leaving on my own account. That God that I believed in would have smite me, would have smut me.
Struck you down.
He would have made me dead quickly, or he would have made my life miserable, only to face probably hell for eternity. That's what I believed then. And that was so powerful that I didn't even mention my dream to James. But at that morning breakfast table, he said to me out of nowhere, I don't feel welcome here anymore. I want to leave. And that was after months and months of him saying, no, I came here. I surrendered here. I submitted to them. We have to see this through. So it's not that he was secretly holding anything against them. He was all in. And so when he said that, I mentioned my dream, and we started to pray and carefully consider, is this God maybe saying we can leave? Is he giving us an out? And so I confided in my best friend from the group, and of course it was brought to the leader, which resulted in us getting a phone call. James got the phone call, and we were kicked out. We were told this is all just, our own stuff, and we have to be on our own with all this. And that was a moment where we didn't know if it was time to laugh or to cry. So we kind of did both. And we decided to not go back, but come to America, which we then, within a little over a month, ended up doing.
And what was the aftermath like emotionally and spiritually for you? It sounded like you had invested so much of your life and your spiritual health and your emotional health into this group. What did the fallout look like?
It was very rough. Just within a few weeks, I got this severe bladder infection. I got like super, super sick bladder infection. It was winter, and we left our apartment to go to the emergency room. We locked ourselves out accidentally, so we knew we're going to the hospital only to come back and having to deal with, we locked ourselves out. And so that is what happened. We had to call the locksmith in the night, and that man just laughed at us, and it was so expensive. And we had to wait in the freezing cold. We were sitting in the elevator. It was so self-fulfilling prophecy that exactly what I thought was going to happen did happen. Also, before we left, they had the opportunity to give us a real friendly curse, Deuteronomy 28, the curse that God apparently gives Israel when they're not obedient. And so before we even had the chance to tell them that we're thinking about leaving, we were cursed. I don't remember what we did to deserve that at the time, but I remember back then just thinking, I don't know what I did to deserve this, but it all played out. And so I remember sitting in the elevator, and we just about lost it because we were so scared, so desperate, so condemned. And I remember having a vision, closing my eyes and asking God, like, you know our hearts. We didn't leave them because we didn't want you. We couldn't handle it anymore. And then I had this vision of God saying something like, I'm coming for your rescue. I'm striving to rescue you. And so that sustained me for that night and for a few more weeks. But that trip to America was, again, my mother-in-law at some point said to me, and she didn't even see the depth of how afraid we were, that this is not a season of fear. And I thought the plane will probably crash. Yeah. I was kind of feeling bad for all the people that were with me on this plane. At least Jonah's people, they were able to throw him overboard and they got out of it.
Sailed away free.
Yes, but that wasn't going to happen probably. And if we would make it safe to America, then they wouldn't let me in, or I would have to leave. Something with immigration wouldn't go right. But nothing. Everything went beautifully. So that 3/4 of a year until I read that book by the spiritual abuse book by Dave and Jeff, I kept myself busy. I started working with you very quickly, and I started to minister with other women to other people multiple times per week. I needed to prove to everyone and myself that I wasn't spiritually dead. And so what ended up happening was that I was in all these prayer sessions for people I didn't know, and I believe God was giving me words for them, and they were all so kind, so gracious, and God was so good to them through me, that sustained me too. That I did believe God isn't good to me, but at least he's good to other people, and he can be good to other people through me. That was the best I could come up with at that time. Yeah.
Why do you feel compelled to share your story with other people?
Just the fact that it is so prevalent, so little understood, and so incredibly damaging. I can't stop talking about it. I can't stop picking up on the things that I pick up now, that I am healed from it, now that I'm on the other side of it, now that I even have a hard time remembering why I did all the things that I did, that I want others to discover freedom too.
And what would you say to a person who's watching this who is on the other side of their own story of spiritual abuse, where they're out of it and just trying to find their own way through healing and love?
Yes, yeah. Those two books, I think, will be wonderful places to start, because with Dave and Jeff's book, you will be led through really identifying what it was in you that attracted you to them and made you stay. Because it's one thing to get attracted to a trap, but it's like we're locking the cage from within and throwing away the key as the victims, because we have our trust invested in them, and we need to really understand what is that made me do that. And it has also helped me to look into what is narcissism, and how in your entire life, your family, your friends, everybody will be affected by one narcissist.
And why don't you define what narcissist is for us?
Narcissist, I want to add psychopath very gently. Those are people that believe the world revolves around them. They're really convinced of that they're so special that whatever mistakes they would make, they really don't have to carry the consequences. It's more the problem of the people that bring up the problem. They are the problem makers. Dave is so wonderful at teaching that the ones that bring up a problem, they are truly the peacemakers, because it is truth that will set us free, and it's not bowing to a narcissist that will set us free. That will keep us very captivated. And then on top of that, another facet that one cannot miss to reflect on and really go deep in is, what is your image of God?
Say more about that. What is your image of God?
I received something that I didn't believe as a child growing up, and I didn't believe it shortly before I got into the group. I learned this in the group, but I couldn't shake it off after the group, that God is just a monster. He is so scary. Like Jesus needs to save you from that God. He's so scary, but Jesus isn't necessarily more powerful than sin. Because if you're sinful, then it could cancel out your salvation. So that God, that picture of God, that image, I needed to recognize and find the truth, because this God was so damaging to my health, to my faith, to my life.
And that sounds very different than what the book is saying here, sinners in the hands of a loving God. Yes. And so speak a little bit more about the book and how you identified that with your own story.
Yeah, I think the very first thing that was just, whoa, was that he is saying, you have to decide, are you a biblicist or are you a Christian? A Christian reads the Bible through Jesus. A biblicist will find many Bible verses and kind of, depending on their mood or their agenda, rearrange them to get their thing across. But believing that Jesus is really the filter through which we are to read the Bible, and believing that Jesus is the full Godhead, not just a facet of God, but Jesus is God. Like a serious Zondism is to say Jesus is what God has to say. God is like Jesus. You wonder what God is like? God is like Jesus. We haven't always known that, but now we do.
And isn't that spoken clearly in Scripture too?
Yeah, but if you're a biblicist, or when you're a biblicist, you consider all the other harsh words, and you read a lot of harshness into Jesus too, and you disregard a lot of loving things that the Bible, even in the Old Testament, we would learn about God. And at the end of the day, it's just the judgmental God that remains. But if God is really like Jesus says, and he tells us the parable of the prodigal son and how the father takes the son back. All he needed was the son to turn to him. So the father was always waiting, and he just turned to him. He wasn't perfect. He was nothing. He was just came back and was embraced and showered with love. And that is God. That is what God is like. That this monster God is a lie. This God that I learned in this cult was more the character of the leader than it was the God that we learn about in Jesus. Sure. So I can only say, read that book if you need to get a new perspective on who's God, what's he like.
Sounds like a fabulous book, and I look forward to the interview with the author.
Yes, exciting. Yes.
What are some of the major takeaways that you have now, being after and outside of the group, beyond that, that you want to reflect on and share?
Yes. My favorite topic when it comes to anything is authenticity. Can we be truthful? Because in the group I learned you have to hide it. You have to make it up until you believe it. And you cannot share what is really going on because you will get into trouble. But authenticity is the beauty of the gospel. The truth will set us free. And God is trustworthy, and he has good intentions for us. He always had good intentions for us, and with him it's not just that they paved the winding road to hell, or whatever the phrase is. His good intentions are true, and they are already accomplished in Jesus. So my faith needed a complete deconstruction and reconstruction. The faith that I brought into the group, then learned in the group, and had to leave behind, left me with this blessing of really asking, what do I believe? And you could say that is maybe, I ended up only believing the positive ooey-gooey things, but look at Jesus. Look at him. He's all about truth. And that's where I can meet him. That resonates with me. I love truth. I love to say what's really going on. And So that's one major thing. And another one is to trust that God is speaking to you. Yeah, to not defer that responsibility to other people. Yes, God will also speak through other people to you, but the main first interest is that God draws you to himself. It's you and him. And when that is an established, safe relationship, he sends you out to others. But this you and him, before you go out and follow the passion that God has put into your heart, keep coming back to that you and him.
I could see how that would be a safeguard against stepping into a group like this, because then you're looking for that personal relationship yourself versus looking for someone else to tell you what they're seeing.
Yes, and that's exactly, and that's where the topic of conscience comes in too, which has been a very exciting topic for me. I bring it into health and wellness, our health and wellness conscience, because we sit on the couch and we're feeling bad about the fact that we're sitting at the couch. Well, what would happen if we would do something about that bad feeling? What would happen if we were to follow the inclinations of the bad feeling, to change it, to turn it around? And then it's not external, it's internal. And so in the same sense, God has given us a moral compass. And I needed a moral compass so badly, because the unloving things I did again and again in the name of obedience to this God that somehow loves everybody, but it's kind of a real mean jerk, that was never him. And part of me knew that. But I shunned that voice. I made that voice the voice of my soul, or the voice of the flesh, something to ignore. But that voice is so powerful, and it empowers us to really make decisions and say, this is the best decision that I, in front of God, have come to, and I stand for it, and I stand with it. It's my decision, and if it's a mistake, it's my mistake. So much better to make your own mistakes than make mistakes because you were obedient to other people, and then you're stuck in that mess. And so being part of a healthy group is certainly a part of it, but that kind of the litmus test of that healthy group is that they give you that. They give you that you have your own moral compass, and they won't argue with you about that.
So do you find yourself hesitant to join a new group now, or to join a real spiritual organization? What is that like for you now?
I have been part now of the same community, I want to say, or a think tank ministry to me for the last 8 years. So I'm very safe in the home that God has created for me. I do have sometimes a very difficult time, especially in the beginning years. I had an impossible time going to church because I picked up on so much stuff, and it triggered me, and it's like post-traumatic stress disorder, constantly just reminded and uncertain and confused, but all that kind of went away. But for me now in church, I mean, there's the body of Christ. We're one. We're called to be one. So I'm not looking to join a group just so that I can feel like I'm part of the body of Christ. It's more a matter of what's kind of your home base. Where do you get fed? Where do you get healed? Where can you trust? And I have that. And my group has been tremendously supportive of me and trustworthy.
Christina, it has been my pleasure to interview you today on the topic of identifying and overcoming spiritual abuse. So thank you so much, Christina, for sharing your advice with us, for sharing your story with us, and for having the courage to walk through and continue your own journey of healing and freedom, and to be on the other side joyfully